Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Today our lecture is about uh, initial environmental examination and environmental impact guidelines and its regulations. It is actually implementation of Pakistan Environmental Protection Act 1997. We have already gone through all the sections of this act in detail, and we have studied all sections and found that there is a complete jurisdiction setup which has been described in this act. All the things have been very clearly mentioned, starting from the development of the establishment of the environmental agency, and then management procedures, and then their funding procedures, and then what kind of laws are supposed to be implemented for the discharge of the waste, and how the hazardous waste is going to be handled, and then furthermore some description about the magistrates, environmental tribunals. All these things have been very clearly described in this act, and now we are going to study its implementation. So starting with this form of IEE and EIA. In today's lecture and in the coming lectures, we will be considering the guidelines and regulations of IEE and EIA. Basically, it is a very important procedure which is supposed to be followed by any kind of proponent initiating a project. And so what are the jurisdictions, what are the procedures? It has been explained in this section number 12 in detail. Now going to consider under this act and under this section 12 how actually this IEE and EIA will be explained and how it will be implemented, what will be the procedures. So following these value jurisdiction uh, procedures and the limitations and the scope, the guidelines and regulations have been prepared. So these are actually the procedures which will be facilitating the all the implementation of IEE and EIA. So these guidelines are basically to uh, uh, develop the uh, report and to conduct all kinds of studies and to collect the data, and then these are the regulations which are to be followed. So basically these are the things which have been implemented, which have been prepared by the provincial and federal agencies, environmental protection agencies. But these are in the view of these this section number 12. So this section number 12 provides the basic scope and jurisdiction limits and its limitations, and then in the view of these guidelines and regulations have been prepared in detail so that we can properly implement this section number 12 in practical and in the uh, in its and its execution should be actually exhibited in our all kinds of projects. So these guidelines and regulations are actually supported by this section number 12 is like providing the limits and scope and the jurisdiction scope and its limitations, and then it is being explained in detail about the procedures and documentations, and so every kind of information is shared in this section, guidelines and regulations. So we will discuss it in detail one by one. Today we will be having a broader aspect. We will be just covering all the uh, its scope and limitations and the report writing, what kind of tasks are to be conducted in that study and how it is going to be incorporated in the report. All these things will be included in our today's lecture. Then we will follow what kind of guidelines are there which have been defined by uh, the federal and provincial environmental protection agencies. Then we will also study what kind of regulations are described by these agencies. So all these things are basically to facilitate the implementation of this section. All these are under the umbrella and scope of this section number 12. So we have already studied this section and just for the sake of revision, we will be having a quick review of this section. So with the first one, it is about that no proponent of a project shall commence construction or operation unless he has filed with the federal agency an initial environmental examination, or where the project is likely to cause an adverse environmental effect. An environmental impact assessment is submitted, and it has to be get the approval from the federal agency in order to execute that project. This is the basic requirement. Under this subsection 1, we are supposed to submit report. We need to have some rules and regulations in order to implement this subsection 1, which is highlighted. So how we are going to enforce this subsection 1 of section 12? We need a few acts, a few procedures. So under this act, the federal agency is supposed to review this IEE, and in case we are submitting EIA, it is again to be reviewed by the federal agency. And what are the requirements? So it will be reviewed, and if it is to consider to pose some effect, then EIA is supposed to be resubmitted after some modifications. So if there are still some uh, deficiency in the report, if it is going to have an impact on environment, then it is necessary to submit the EIA report. And so then so every review of an environmental impact shall be carried out with the public participation. So because the public, the society and the residents of that area are the main stakeholders which will be most affected. So the uh, environmental impact assessment report must be shared with the public. But there are again some limitations which are covered in this section number 12. So when we are formulating the rules and regulations for IEE and EIA, we have to follow these guideline instructions and guidelines provided in the section subsection 3. So it must not be uh, related to the trade policies and some financial commercial matters or technical matters. So it must have the secrecy of the project must be uh, kept in view, and it must not be shared because it can have its uh, negative impact on the trade, or purpose of the project can be affected if we are going to share such kind of information, technical information, scientific information, which can cause damage to objectives of the project. So these must be kept in secret. At the same time, the DG of the federal agency can decide on him by himself if it is requested by the proponent to keep the information secret and confidential, then the DG has the authority to decide as per the requirements remaining within the limits of the section 12. So then, this information must not be related to international relations or national security. So such things must be kept confidential. Then matters which are under legal privilege, so in these must be kept secret. Then there is a time duration that within 4 months the information, the report must be approved, or and if it is not approved, not decided within 4 months, then it means that it will be automatically considered as accepted. But again, we can see there is a limitation: approved to the extent to which it does not contravene the provisions of this act. So again, the scope is the act. Within this act, we are supposed to perform all the activities. If it is again exceeding the limit, is not contravening, is sorry, if it is contravening the act, then it will not be. And then again, the federal government has the powers to extend the time duration. Then we are supposed to follow the above sections, and the jurisdiction of these four, we are supposed to perform the requirements. And then there must be a record keeping of all kinds of these IEEs and EIAs which are being conducted and which are being submitted to the agencies. So here we will be having now that was something about the about the section number 12 of the Act. Now we will be seeing what EIA has, how it initiated, and what are its motive, motives. So a very brief history. If you have already gone through the its starting and its implementation, it was the most important aspect in the 1983 ordinance, Environmental Protection Ordinance, which was approved in 1983. It was the most important thing. Then EIA became mandatory from 1994, and then the documentation of the sectoral guidelines was effective from 1997. Then the rules and regulations following that act uh, 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 enacted enactment of this act followed by the IEE and EIA regulations of 2000. Then finally the National Environmental Policy in 5, which describes integration of environment into development planning through implementation of EIA at project level, promotion of strategic environmental assessment, the tool for integrating environment into decision-making process. So for all kinds of planning and development projects, EIA was considered as the major tool, and it was an integrated part of the decision making. So decision making was subjected to the environmental impact of any kind of project which is going to be implemented. Then we have some environmental screening cells for the purpose to facilitate the decisions. These decisions which are which were to be taken by the development planning and development division at federal levels. and its corresponding provincial departments as well. This is something about the flowchart, how the IEEE and EIA process initiates. So first of all, we have a project proposal, then the screening process is to be initiated. And then as per requirement, IEE is to be prepared. And if there is a chance of some um, environmental impact, then EIA is to be required. So we have schedule 1, schedule 2, and then we have schedule 4 as well. We will discuss in our next lecture. These are some of the procedures how the this IEE is to be initiated, proceed, and then you can see that public involvement is also there. Review EIA reports to be submitted for the review, and then decision making is conducted on its submission. Then approval or not approval will be conducted based on the report. So what is the procedure? It is again kind of same activity in which screening is important, and we need to follow this. In this case, we must also have a view what is environmental impact statement. So for the detail of this, you can go through this slide. An environmental impact statement is actually a document that describes the impact on the environment as a result of a proposed action. How we can differentiate EIS with EIA? EIA is actually the procedures which are supposed adopted for conducting the impact assessment, all that, while this EIS is the document. It is a report which is prepared on that basis. In here we have the EIA package, and this EIA package includes the guidelines, it includes the rules and regulations, it includes the these are some general guidelines for assessment, guidelines, and then public consultations, and then sensitive and critical areas to be implemented, environmental protection legislation, and NEQS, which is also approved by the federal as well as provincial agencies. And now some of the sectorial guidelines which are specific to the uh, nature of the project. So thermal power stations, chemical and manufacturing plants, municipal waste disposal and new township developments, oil gas exploration production, major roads, water supply scheme, sewerage scheme, industrial estates, and then the format of the rules and regulations. So all these things are in the EIA package. So how we are going to prepare the report? We must need an executive summary of the project, and then we have an introduction in which the purpose of the report and uh, including the identification of the project and exponents, a brief description of nature, size, location of the project, and then IEE study, scope of the study, all these things are part of this. Then we need to explain the description of the project. This is about the nature of the project and type and category of project objectives, and then uh, what kind of modifications we can do in this project to improve the environmental impact, and if there is any kind of negative impact, how we can find the alternative to those components or the project itself. These are the major features of the report. So we need to explain the location, and then we need to have maps, photographs, and site layouts. And so everything which is concerned with the environment, like national parks, the land and its usage, the wildlife reserves, archaeological sites. All these things are important from social point of views, ecological point of views, and environmental. In your course, which is very much specific to environmental impact assessment, you will study all these things in detail. You will be more concerned with the procedures and their application. What procedure is the most suitable for a typical project based on its nature and its scope. All these things are discussed in detail in that course, but now we are actually studying the IEE and EIA with reference to the Act. What are our limitations? What are we supposed to do for getting our project approved uh, for its execution? Size or magnitude of the operation are important, and then proposed schedule for implementation, then the drawings are important. All these things are to be submitted. Also, here you can see that what kind of description we are supposed to provide. Physical resources, ecological resources, human and economic development, and infrastructure, industry, institutions, transport, land use, planning, and so all these things are with reference to the ecological impact, social impact, and environmental. So quality of life, how it is going to be affected if the project is executed. Public socioeconomic values, recreational resources, aesthetic values. In most of the cases, you can see that we need to clear the land, we need to demolish the existing structures which can include some archaeological or historical important structures, or some important buildings which are related to our history, and maybe there are some land use like forest, and there are some water resources which are going to be disturbed. So all of these things are to be studied, and then we are going to evaluate their screening of the potential environmental impact and mitigation. So we are going to find out what kind of loss we are going to give to the environment. So mitigation measures where appropriate should also be recommended. So for example, if there is some water resource damage, we must recommend some alternate water resource provision, or we must uh, provide some a solution to that damage. And this is a project location. Maybe if due to the project location environmental problems are affecting the residents, so it must be reviewed and revisited, and then maybe some design aspect can create problem. More like thermal projects are more uh, air pollution causing, so we must revisit the design, and we must create an eco-friendly designing of the project. Thermal projects and all the projects like oil wells are also very much creating environmental issues. So you are supposed to check what kind of environmental issues are caused by those oil drilling wells, and we must find out the most eco-friendly solution to the design project. So similarly, some construction projects can also have problems which we must reconsider. So similarly, others as well. Here are the requirements, environmental monitoring program, institutional requirements. So this section of the report must describe the management plan and monitoring and surveillance programs, because once the project has been executed, after that we can have some impact. So what will we do once the environmental problem has started after the execution? Because EIA must be submitted before the execution, and it cannot cover those aspects which will be uh, uh, taking place after the construction or execution of the project. So what is the planning for that stage? So this section of the report must consider the management plan and monitoring surveillance programs after the project. There must be assurance from the from the proponent to the federal agency that the program must be accompanied by the details of the institutional capacity of the proponent, including staff training. So all these things must be assured by the owner. So now something about the scoping. It is a very important step. It is going to define what kind of use this project has, what kind of objectives this project has. So the scoping can help. The scoping is actually first of all going to consider all kinds of environmental uh, issues. And if there are some component which is causing environmental issues, it must be eliminated or find out some alternative. So it will help. This scoping will help. So this scoping will help in considering reasonable alternatives, inform the affected, potentially affect people of the proposal and alternatives. So all what kind of effect the people can have, it can be determined from this scope. Then identify the possible effect on the environment. It will be described here. So values held by the individuals. So what price is going to be paid by the community or by the people if it is having negative impact. So evaluation of the possible environmental effects and its cost is important, which can be found out by the scoping. Then defining the boundaries of any required further assessment, it will be again under this scoping. It is an important tool to find out all the answers to these questions. So a typical list of steps for scoping is prepare an outline of the scope, objective description of the proposal, context and setting of the proposal, constraints, alternatives, issues, public involvement, and the time frame. All these things are the part of the scoping. Then based on this, further develop the outline of the scope through discussion with the key stakeholders and then cover the gap. Make the outline and supporting information available to those whose views are obtained. Identify the issues of concern and evaluate the concerns for both technical and subjective uh, perspective. Amend the outline to incorporate the agreed suggestions. So all these things are to be done in order to conduct a scoping. So while preparing all these data and the documentation and report writing, what kind of major challenges we can face? So there are some of the issues. So the most important is the concern, health concern, and the contamination of the environment. And we can have the issues of conservation of biodiversity, safeguarding the productivity of natural resources. So we have the issues like level of awareness and understanding, and which the stakeholders are not properly having the information and how to deal with these environmental issues. Then quality of EIA and the review EIA review is also important. What kind of research work and that studies have been conducted, and then drawbacks or the public involvement. Then jurisdiction of responsibility. Who is responsible for which act? It is also an important thing. So implementation problems related to the baseline data, related to the procedures of the implementation of monitoring specific, and then capacity to implement. We don't have required manpower, institutional mechanisms, consultancy services. All these things are the issues which are faced for implementing, for preparing EIA reports and then its proper implementation. So there are some recommendations how we can overcome these things. It is by proper planning the EIA and then get getting baseline data, then capacity to implement, and then institutional mechanisms. All these things are the recommendations for the a better uh, execution of the EIA report and its impact. So again, this is the summary. What kind of issues? So availability and reliability of baseline data, and due to lack of coordination of and cooperation. This is the major issue. Then EIA procedure and guidelines are not properly disseminated and clearly understood. So we can achieve this by this suggestion. So lack of institutional capacity, it can be solved by this. Then lack of institutional mechanism for coordination for EIA of public sectors. No relationship between EIA with land use planning exists. We can go through it. Then weak implementation and enforcement mechanism, weak public participation and consultancy services problem, insufficient judicial support, lack of financial resources. All these are the issues which are faced, and these are the suggestions how we can deal with it. Please go through all these data, and hopefully it will be very informative, and it will facilitate in the properly execution of EIA and achieving the true objectives of this EIA conduction. In our next lecture, we will be considering the guidelines and regulations of EIA, which were prepared based on the section number 12. So, thank you very much for today's lecture.